because obviously there will be other investigations into these cartels.
Orlando, Florida exploded before sunrise. More than 700 federal agents moved at once. 14 cartel-linked locations, one synchronized strike. What began as silence ended in gunfire. DEA, FBI, and ICE units hit targets across the state within the same operational window. No staggered entries, no warning. Black Hawk helicopters cut low across suburban rooftops, their rotors tearing through fog and dust. Spotlights scanned streets that hours earlier had been quiet. On the ground, breach teams moved in unison. Flashbangs detonated across residential blocks. Doors collapsed inward. Tactical units cleared rooms with disciplined speed. But within minutes, the operation escalated beyond a standard enforcement action. Gunfire erupted from an unmarked structure in downtown Orlando. The resistance was organized, not panicked, not scattered. From beneath the building, inside a reinforced basement position, automatic bursts tore upward through concrete and drywall. Agents were forced behind ballistic shields. Suppressive fire answered from the perimeter. The exchange lasted only minutes, but it was sustained, deliberate, and defensive. When it stopped, the area looked like a combat zone. Walls shredded, windows blown out, smoke hanging low over asphalt marked by spent casings and shattered debris. This was no routine raid. It was structured resistance. And when the final door was breached, agents expected narcotics, cash, weapons. They found something else, a badge. The man inside was not a trafficker, not a cartel enforcer. He was sworn law enforcement. Hidden in the fortified office beneath collapsed concrete and shattered surveillance monitors stood a uniformed deputy of the Osceola County Sheriff's Office. His ballistic vest still strapped, service weapon holstered, identification intact, Sheriff Marcos Lopez. The name carried weight in federal briefings. Lopez had chaired joint narcotics coordination meetings. He had sat at tables where interdiction strategy was discussed. He had access. And now he stood inside a cartel stronghold. The arrest was immediate. Agents secured him without hesitation while forensic teams began processing the scene. The uniform was regulation, the credentials legitimate. There was no confusion about identity. The silence that followed was heavier than the gunfire. Because this was not external infiltration, this was internal compromise. Tactical teams were ordered to continue the sweep, but the focus shifted. Not just contraband, intelligence. At that moment, the officers faced a familiar fork in the road. End the stop, or extend it to resolve the inconsistencies. Extending a stop is not casual. It carries procedural responsibility and legal boundaries. It demands restraint, discipline, and confidence in training. They chose controlled observation. They compared the stated travel route against geography. They evaluated the trailer not as a single object, but as a system. Weight distribution, structural alignment, mechanical integrity. In major interdiction cases, turning points rarely arrive with drama. They emerge from procedure, and then one did. A subtle but clear physical indicator surfaced, enough to shift the stop from routine traffic enforcement into investigative posture. From that moment forward, this was no longer about paperwork. It became the first confirmed link in a wider enforcement chain. What began as an I-70 stop now carried operational weight. The officers had objective reason to believe the vehicle connected to something larger than a minor violation. The roadside atmosphere changed, not into chaos, but into a different kind of quiet. This was not highway silence. It was professional silence, the kind that settles when stakes increase and margin for error shrinks. Voices lower, movement slow. Every step becomes deliberate. In these moments, control matters more than speed, because speed creates mistakes, and mistakes compromise cases. A K-9 unit was introduced with coordinated efficiency. No theatrics, no unnecessary escalation. Real operations rely on routine competence, not display. The dog began working the trailer methodically. Seams, hinges, structural edges, panel transitions. Areas where odor molecules can escape under pressure or temperature change. To a passing driver, the process might have appeared slow. It wasn't hesitation, it was precision. Built on repetition, built on training, built to eliminate doubt. The alert came quickly, and its meaning was immediate. The dog's behavioral shift matched trained indicators, transforming suspicion into probable cause under American legal standards. That distinction is critical. A traffic stop has limits. Probable cause changes what officers are authorized to do next. In seconds, the legal framework of the encounter shifted. What had been questioning became a supported path toward full inspection. The trailer was opened. The search began step by step. At first glance, the cargo appeared ordinary, boxes arranged in patterns consistent with commercial transport. That normal appearance was not accidental. Interstate commerce is built on uniformity. Trafficking networks exploit that structure. Anything visibly irregular attracts scrutiny. So, concealment is engineered to look routine. But as officers moved deeper into the load, irregularities surfaced. Certain containers revealed structural modifications inconsistent with standard packaging. Internal framing suggested deliberate engineering, not incidental damage. Hidden compartments are not improvised. They require time, planning, understanding of inspection procedures. That preparation itself signals organization. When the compartments were opened, the nature of the trip changed instantly. Compressed packages of cocaine appeared, layered, wrapped, arranged with disciplined precision. This was not chaotic concealment. It reflected standardized process. The configuration suggested repetition, an operation accustomed to long-distance movement, designed for control, designed for risk reduction. The quantity was confirmed on scene, more than 300 pounds. At that scale, ambiguity disappears. This was not a personal use quantity, not a small-scale transfer. It represented a major contraband shipment and a financial asset valued in the tens of millions of dollars on the street. The impact extended beyond Indiana. A load of this size likely fed distribution networks across multiple communities. Removing it disrupted a segment of a broader supply chain. For the suspects, the opening of those compartments ended any plausible denial. The evidence was physical, visible, systematically arranged. For enforcement, the discovery expanded the scope immediately. Attention shifted beyond the roadside. How was the shipment organized? Where did it originate? Where was it headed? How many similar loads were already moving across other corridors? At that point, the shoulder of Interstate 70 transformed. It was no longer a traffic stop. It was a crime scene with potential federal implications. The cocaine was the most visible result, but it was not the only one, and possibly not the most important. In cases like this, the real value is never just the drugs. It is what they represent. The network, the logistics chain, the financing structure, the coordination required to move a shipment across state lines without disruption. Once the scale was confirmed, the operational tempo shifted immediately. The arrest phase unfolded with controlled speed. At this level, officers cannot allow confusion, delay, or opportunity. The suspects were handcuffed and separated from the vehicle without hesitation, not as a display of force, but as a calculated method of scene control. Roadside environments are unpredictable. Traffic continues moving at highway speed. Visibility is limited. The shoulder offers minimal protection. Control is not authority, it is safety. The perimeter around the pickup and trailer was secured with balanced precision. Enough restriction to protect the scene, enough flexibility to maintain operational flow. Evidence integrity became the priority within seconds. Space was preserved, movement was limited. The chain of custody began immediately. This phase is often underestimated. In large-scale narcotics cases, defense strategies frequently focus on procedural handling. If evidence is mishandled in the first minutes, the entire case becomes structurally weaker later. That is why the atmosphere remained quiet and methodical despite the magnitude of the seizure. Precision replaced urgency. Early mistakes echo in courtrooms months later. The pickup and trailer were no longer transportation tools. They became primary evidence assets. Officers documented position, orientation, identifying marks, structural details, and environmental conditions. Every observation was recorded systematically. Cases of this size often escalate beyond local jurisdiction. When additional agencies enter, the original documentation becomes foundational. A strong prosecution begins on the roadside, not in the courtroom. The cocaine packages were removed according to evidence standards, counted, cataloged, secured. Each unit handled to prevent contamination, loss, or confusion. This process is not simply about physical storage. It is about legal continuity. From discovery to courtroom presentation, evidence must remain intact, traceable, and unquestionable. Any gap becomes vulnerability. Any vulnerability becomes leverage. That is why consistency outweighed speed. The legal framework clarified rapidly. With more than 300 pounds confirmed, this moved far beyond simple possession. The scale indicated transportation and intent to distribute at a serious level. Quantity alone signals distribution infrastructure rather than individual consumption. Loads of this magnitude typically connect to structured supply chains, not isolated actors. From a tactical standpoint, immediate arrests removed opportunities for interference. In organized trafficking systems, communication can trigger countermeasures, destruction of evidence elsewhere, rerouting of parallel shipments, disruption of investigative pathways. Officers cannot control the broader network in that moment, but they can secure the node directly in front of them. Preserving custody and preventing coordination were essential. This type of operation demonstrates a specific enforcement strength. Discipline and patience can produce substantial outcomes without dramatic confrontation. There was no chase, no exchange of gunfire, no chaotic escalation. Yet the result was significant, a major narcotics load removed through observation, procedure, and timing. But the roadside arrests were not the conclusion. They were the beginning. A shipment of this scale requires planning layers. It implies staging points, communication channels, financial backing, and downstream distribution cells. The trailer and packages were only the visible surface. Beneath them exists infrastructure. Early indicators from the stop and initial data suggested the load likely originated in Missouri. And if that assessment proves accurate, Interstate 70 was not the source. It was the transit corridor. From there, the movement pattern became clearer. The shipment appeared to be traveling from Missouri through Indiana along Interstate 70 as part of a broader transport corridor. That route is essential to legitimate commerce, and precisely because of that, it is equally valuable for illicit logistics. When a highway carries massive volume day and night, traffic itself becomes camouflage. Scale becomes cover, routine becomes concealment. Interstate 70 holds strategic weight. It crosses multiple states, links production zones with storage hubs, and feeds redistribution networks stretching across the Midwest toward the east. Freight moves constantly. Vehicles rarely stand out unless behavior breaks pattern. Trafficking networks understand this dynamic. They do not attempt to dominate highways. They attempt to dissolve into them. From a logistics perspective, the structure suggested by this case appears decentralized and adaptable. Civilian vehicles, normal cargo presentation, no visible intimidation. The objective is not to control territory, it is to disappear inside infrastructure. This reflects modern criminal adaptation. Efficiency and invisibility now replace spectacle and fear. A decentralized system also absorbs damage more effectively. When a network depends on one channel, a single seizure can cripple operations. When routes, vehicles, and staging points are diversified, the loss of one load becomes a contained failure, not systemic collapse. That is why this interception carries weight. It may expose a link that was designed never to be visible. Even without a public announcement of a broader federal campaign, a seizure of this magnitude typically triggers follow-on investigative work. Evidence recovered roadside can reconstruct timelines, communication intervals, routing decisions, and logistical signatures. Investigators analyze staging patterns, fuel stops, documentation habits, and structural concealment techniques to identify similar anomalies elsewhere. Highways in that context become more than pavement. They become contested systems. On one side, trafficking networks rely on the vast scale of American logistics, confident that total inspection is impossible. On the other, enforcement relies on experience, interagency coordination, intelligence sharing, and targeted procedural pressure to identify rare points of vulnerability. The balance shifts continuously. Networks adapt. Enforcement adapts faster or loses ground. The core significance of the Interstate 70 seizure is not only the 300 pounds removed from circulation, it is the insight gained into structure. A roadside stop evolved into visibility inside a larger mechanism. Every shipment requires planning. Planning leaves patterns. Patterns leave traces. When those traces are assembled, the architecture behind the shipment begins to emerge. This case reflects a broader reality of modern drug crime in the United States. Large-scale trafficking is no longer defined solely by street-level distribution. It functions as a logistics enterprise embedded within legitimate infrastructure. Transport corridors, documentation control, compartment engineering, and financial coordination now carry equal importance to the product itself. The highway is not just a road. It is a delivery system capable of moving massive value across state lines within hours. Because of that evolution, enforcement strategy has increasingly shifted toward supply chain disruption rather than reacting only to downstream street activity. Street distribution is visible, but it is replaceable. If upstream pipelines remain intact, the system regenerates. Interdiction at the transport level strikes closer to structural core, and that shift has elevated the role of technology and data-driven enforcement. Not louder tactics, smarter ones. Highway enforcement is no longer limited to obvious traffic violations. It has evolved into behavioral analysis supported by interagency intelligence sharing. Small inconsistencies now matter: a route that does not align with cargo, documentation that feels technically correct but structurally off, a psychological response that does not match a routine delivery profile. In this environment, minor irregularities can justify controlled escalation. Federal highways have become quiet arenas of competition between concealment and detection. Smuggling networks attempt to replicate normal commerce. Law enforcement studies which version of normal is slightly wrong. This conflict rarely produces dramatic footage. It produces disciplined outcomes. Procedural error can weaken a case. Hesitation can allow a shipment worth tens of millions to pass untouched. The margin is narrow. Modern trafficking networks have adapted accordingly. Visible violence has been reduced. Administrative camouflage has increased. Civilian vehicles, ordinary packaging, familiar routes. Attention is their greatest threat, so invisibility becomes the strategy. That evolution makes detection harder. When fear disappears, patterns become subtle. Enforcement must rely on sustained observation, experience, and coordinated data rather than visible. Warning signs. Each seizure does more than remove narcotics. It interrupts financial flow, it forces rerouting, it generates internal suspicion. When a shipment of this scale is lost, network leadership must determine whether the failure resulted from chance, carelessness, or exposure. Those internal recalculations can create additional pressure points. The larger strategic question remains open. Are quiet interdictions enough to reshape long-term conditions, or do they simply slow a system that continuously adapts? The Indiana case demonstrates the effectiveness of patience and procedure. It also underscores the scale of the challenge. The interstate system is vast. Success is measured over sustained pressure, not isolated victories. From a late-night stop on Interstate 70, more than 300 pounds of cocaine were removed before the load could move deeper into national distribution channels. No pursuit, no gunfire, no spectacle. The deciding factors were discipline, timing, and adherence. 2. Procedure. This reflects the modern reality of narcotics enforcement. Not a single decisive battle, but a sequence of precise disruptions aimed at critical transport links before networks can recalibrate. Trafficking systems are not dismantled overnight. Yet every seizure forces rerouting, increases operational risk, and disrupts the trust and coordination required to maintain supply chains. Over time, accumulated disruption compresses operational space. If sustained, that pressure narrows options even as networks attempt to evolve. In this environment, routine traffic stops can become strategic inflection points. They generate intelligence that exposes infrastructure behind movement, converting ordinary enforcement into long-term leverage. If you want deeper analysis of how supply chains are disrupted and how enforcement pressure reshapes criminal logistics across the United States, follow State Tone. This channel tracks the structure behind the headlines. What do you think? Do interdictions like this produce lasting structural change, or are they temporary interruptions in a much longer contest?